Sometimes the smallest hearts carry the greatest courage, and the most unlikely friendships are born from moments of pure compassion. In 1882, Arizona Territory, 7-year-old Apache girl Nayeli finds a massive mountain lion trapped in a cruel, iron snare, crying out in pain and fear. While any grown person would run away, this brave little girl sees the suffering in the great cat's golden eyes and knows she has to help. She whispers gentle Apache words to calm the frightened beast and carefully frees him from the trap with her small hands. The mountain lion could have attacked her in that moment, but instead he does something that will take your breath away. He bows his head to the little girl, as if saying thank you, then disappears into the canyon. What happens next between this Apache child and the mountain lion she saved will become a legend that folks still talk about today. How could one small act of kindness create a bond so powerful that it changed both their lives forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun painted the red canyon walls in shades of amber and gold, casting long shadows across the Apache settlement nestled in the protective embrace of the ancient rocks. 7-year-old Nayeli sat cross-legged beside her grandmother's, cooking fire, her dark eyes reflecting the dancing flames as Itzel stirred a pot of rabbit stew with practiced hands. The old woman's face was a map of wisdom lines, each crease telling stories of seasons past and lessons learned from a lifetime spent listening to the desert's whispers. "Grandmother," Nayeli said softly, her small fingers tracing patterns in the red dust. "Tell me again about the old days, when the animals spoke to our people." Itzel's weathered hands paused in their stirring, and she looked down at her granddaughter with eyes that held the depth of mountain springs. The ancient Apache medicine pouch at her waist, filled with sacred stones and herbs passed down through generations, seemed to pulse with unseen energy. This pouch had belonged to Itzel's grandmother, and her grandmother before that, carrying the wisdom of countless medicine women who had walked these canyon paths. "Child," Itzel began, her voice carrying the rhythm of wind through desert stones, "there was a time when the boundary between human and animal was thin as morning mist. Our ancestors knew the language of the wolf, the song of the eagle, the deep rumbling thoughts of the bear. But these gifts come with great responsibility. To speak with the animals means to understand their pain, their joy, their ancient wisdom." The settlement around them was beginning to stir with the day's activities. Smoke rose from cooking fires, scattered throughout the small cluster of traditional dwellings, while Apache women prepared meals and tended to children. The sound of Nayeli's father, Nalnish, sharpening tools, mixed with the distant laughter of children playing among the red rocks. Her mother, Ciala, emerged from their family dwelling, her gentle smile warming Nayeli's heart as she approached with fresh bread wrapped in soft cloth. "Our little dreamer is asking about the old stories again," Ciala said, settling beside them with fluid grace. Her long black hair was braided with small feathers and beads that caught the morning light, and her hands still bore the faint scent of the healing herbs she had been grinding for the tribal medicine woman. Nalnish joined them, his presence commanding yet gentle. As one of the tribe's respected warriors and hunters, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who understood both the harsh realities of their changing world and the timeless wisdom of their ancestors. The morning light revealed the concern lines that had grown deeper around his eyes in recent months, evidence of the mounting pressures facing their people. "The white settlers grow bolder each passing moon," he said quietly, not wanting to alarm his daughter, but needing to share his burdens with his family. "Their surveyors were seen again yesterday, marking trees near the sacred groves. They speak of progress and civilization, but I see only greed in their eyes." Itzel nodded gravely, her gnarled fingers reaching for the hand-carved cedar flute that had belonged to Nayeli's grandfather. The instrument, worn smooth by decades of use, represented the musical traditions and storytelling heritage that connected their family to countless generations of Apache ancestors. She held it carefully, as if it might channel the wisdom of those who had played its haunting melodies under these same desert stars. "Change comes like the seasons," Itzel said, her voice carrying both sadness and strength. "Some changes bring renewal, like spring rain after winter's cold. Others bring destruction, like flash floods that tear away everything in their path. Our people must learn to bend like the desert willow, strong enough to survive the storm, but flexible enough not to break." Nayeli listened intently, her young mind absorbing these adult concerns, while her heart remained focused on the magical stories of animal communication. She had always felt a special connection to the creatures of the canyon. The quick darting lizards, the patient buzzards circling overhead, the shy deer that appeared at dawn to drink from the hidden springs. Sometimes, in her quietest moments, she almost felt she could understand their silent communications. The tribal elder Chaska approached their fire, his ancient frame moving with surprising grace despite his advanced years. His presence commanded immediate respect, for he was the keeper of the old stories, the guardian of traditions that stretched back to the time when the Apache first learned to read the desert's secret language. "Good morning, little one," he said to Nayeli, his voice like wind through canyon chambers. "I hear you have been asking about the animal speakers of old." "Yes, Grandfather Chaska," Nayeli replied, using the respectful title given to all tribal elders. "Grandmother says there were people who could talk to the mountain lions and the eagles." Chaska settled beside their fire with a soft grunt, accepting the bowl of stew that Ciala offered him. His eyes, still sharp despite his age, studied Nayeli with an intensity that made her feel as if he could see something in her that she herself did not yet understand. "The gift of animal speech was not given lightly," he began, his words measured and deliberate. "It came to those whose hearts were pure, whose spirits were strong enough to bridge the world of human thought and animal instinct. These special and served as guardians, protectors of the balance between all living things." As if summoned by their conversation, Halona, the medicine woman, appeared at the edge of their gathering. Her presence brought with it the scent of sage and sweetgrass, and the soft tinkling of the many pouches and amulets that hung from her belt. She was a woman of middle years, her face marked by both kindness and the weight of her responsibilities as a healer and spiritual guide. "The child has questions," Halona observed, settling gracefully beside Chaska. "I have seen her in my dreams, speaking with the spirits of the canyon. There is something special about this one, something that calls to the old powers." Nayeli felt a shiver run down her spine at these words, though she did not fully understand their meaning. She looked from face to face around the fire, seeing something in the adult's expressions that spoke of secrets and possibilities beyond her young comprehension. Young Takala, a brave, only a few years older than Nayeli, jogged up to their gathering with the easy athleticism of youth. His arrival brought news from the outer canyon, where he had been practicing his tracking skills under the guidance of the tribe's scouts. "Uncle Nalnish," he said, slightly breathless from his run, "the animals are acting strange near the northern ridges. The deer are avoiding their usual paths, and the birds fall silent when you approach certain areas. Even the insects seem restless." Nalnish and Chaska exchanged meaningful glances, both men understanding that disturbances in animal behavior often preceded human troubles. The desert creatures were more sensitive to coming changes than any human scout, their instincts honed by countless generations of survival in this harsh but beautiful land. "Perhaps," Itzel said quietly, her eyes resting on Nayeli's expectant face, "the time of the animal speakers is not as far in the past as we believed." The morning continued with the gentle rhythm of Apache daily life. Nayeli helped her mother prepare materials for basket weaving, her small fingers learning to select the right grasses and prepare them for use. She listened to the conversations flowing around her, discussions of hunting parties, concerns about the encroaching settlers, plans for the upcoming harvest ceremonies. Yet part of her attention remained fixed on the canyon walls, where she sometimes glimpsed shadows that might have been prowling cats or might have been tricks of light and stone. As the sun climbed higher, painting the desert in brilliant whites and deep shadows, Nayeli found herself drawn to the edge of the settlement. Here, where the carefully tended Apache community gave way to the wild expanse of canyon and desert, she felt a calling she could not name. The red rocks seemed to pulse with hidden life, and the wind carried scents that spoke of adventure and mystery. Her father approached, having noticed her distant expression. "What captures your thoughts, little daughter?" he asked, settling beside her on a sun-warmed boulder. "I dream of the deep canyon, father," she admitted quietly. "In my dreams, I walk paths I have never seen, and the animals watch me without fear. Sometimes I think they are trying to tell me something important." Nalnish was quiet for a long moment, his experienced eyes scanning the rugged landscape that had been his people's home for generations, uncounted. Finally, he spoke with the careful consideration of a man who understood that some truths could only be revealed gradually. "There are places in the deep canyon that our people consider sacred, places where the boundary between the physical world and the spirit world grows thin. These are not places for children to wander alone, for they hold both great power and great danger." The afternoon brought its own rhythms and responsibilities. Nayeli practiced her lessons with the other children, learning the intricate beadwork patterns that told the stories of her people, memorizing the songs that connected her to her ancestors, and developing the practical skills that would serve her throughout her life. Yet even as her hands worked and her voice joined in the ancient melodies, her heart remained tuned to something calling from the wild places beyond the settlement's safety. As evening approached and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the Apache families gathered for the communal meal. The scent of roasted meat and corn cakes filled the air, and the sound of conversation and laughter created a warm tapestry of human community. Nayeli sat between her parents, feeling the love and security of her family, while her spirit yearned for something she could not yet name. "Tomorrow," her grandmother said quietly, placing a weathered hand on Nayeli's shoulder, "you may help me gather medicinal plants from the canyon slopes, but you must promise to stay close and listen carefully. To my warnings, the desert keeps its own counsel, and it does not suffer fools gladly." As the stars wheeled overhead and the night sounds of the desert began their ancient chorus, Nayeli lay on her sleeping robes and listened to the world beyond the settlement's borders. Somewhere in the darkness, she sensed something waiting for her, something that would change her life in ways she could not yet imagine. The medicine pouch her grandmother had given her seemed to pulse with warmth against her chest, as if responding to forces beyond the realm of ordinary understanding. The night wind carried whispers of change, and in her dreams, Nayeli ran through moonlit canyons, where great cats watched her passage with eyes like golden stars, and eagles soared overhead, calling her name in languages older than human memory. The morning mist still clung to the canyon walls when Nayeli slipped away from the settlement, her bare feet silent on the red stone paths that led into the deeper wilderness. She had promised to help her grandmother gather medicinal plants, but something stronger than promise pulled her toward the forbidden reaches of the northern canyon, where Takala had reported the strange animal behavior. The iron trap, with its cruel bloodstains, would change everything. Though she did not yet know it, her medicine pouch bounced gently against her chest as she climbed higher into the maze of red rock formations, following game trails that twisted between towering stone pillars and disappeared into shadowed crevices. The morning air carried scents of sage and juniper, mixed with something else, something that made her pause and test the wind like the hunters of her tribe. Fear, pain, the metallic scent of blood. Nayeli's heart began to race, but her feet continued forward as if drawn by invisible threads. She had inherited her grandfather's gift for moving silently through the wilderness, and now that skill served her as she approached a narrow canyon where the walls curved inward, creating a natural amphitheater hidden from casual view. The sound reached her first, a low rumbling moan that seemed to vibrate through the stone itself. It was not quite a growl, not quite a cry, but something that spoke of such profound suffering that it made her small chest tighten with empathy. She pressed herself against the cool canyon wall and peered around the rocky corner. What she saw nearly stopped her heart. A magnificent mountain lion, easily the largest she had ever imagined, lay trapped within a cage of cruel iron bars. The trap was a brutal thing, designed not just to capture, but to inflict maximum suffering. Sharp metal spikes lined the interior, and the beast's golden coat was matted with blood from dozens of wounds. His massive paws, each the size of a man's hand, scraped weakly against the iron that held him prisoner. But it was his eyes that broke Nayeli's heart completely. Those golden orbs, which should have burned with the fierce pride of the mountain. King instead held a depth of pain and desperation that spoke directly to her soul. They were the eyes of a creature who understood that death was approaching, who had abandoned hope of escape, and who suffered not just physical agony, but the deeper torment of a proud spirit broken by human cruelty. The mountain lion's gaze found her where she crouched in the shadows, and for a moment that stretched into eternity, girl and great cat simply looked at each other. Nayeli expected to see hunger in those eyes, or the wild aggression that her father had taught her to fear in cornered predators. Instead, she saw something that shook her to her core. She saw recognition, intelligence, and a pleading that transcended the boundaries between species. "Oh, great one," she whispered in the Apache tongue her grandmother had taught her, the words that were meant for speaking with the animal spirits. "What have they done to you?" The mountain lion's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, and his massive head lifted slightly. He made no threatening gesture, no show of fangs or claws. Instead, he simply watched her with those impossibly expressive eyes, and somehow, in a way that defied all logic and reason, Nayeli understood what he was trying to communicate. "Help me, little sister. I am dying." The realization hit her like a physical blow. This magnificent creature, this king of the canyon, who should have lived free beneath the open sky, was trapped here by the greed and cruelty of men who saw him only as a threat to be eliminated or a trophy to be claimed. The iron bars that held him were not just a prison. They were a torture device designed to ensure maximum suffering before death finally provided release. Nayeli's hands shook as she approached the trap, every instinct screaming at her to flee from the proximity of such a powerful predator. But stronger than fear was the voice of her grandmother, speaking of the old times when Apache children were taught to see the sacred spirit that lived in all creatures, especially the great hunters of the wild places. "I am going to help you," she whispered, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I don't know how, but I am going to get you out of there." The mountain lion's response was a soft, rumbling sound, almost like a purr, but deeper, more primal. It was the sound of a creature acknowledging kindness from an unexpected source, of hope rekindling in a heart that had accepted death. The trap's mechanism was more complex than anything Nayeli had ever encountered, a maze of springs and catches designed by minds that understood the engineering of suffering. Her small fingers traced the iron bars, feeling for weak points or hidden releases, while the mountain lion lay perfectly still, as if understanding that his only chance for freedom lay in the hands of this Apache child. "My grandmother says that all things have a spirit," Nayeli murmured as she worked, her voice providing comfort to both herself and her unlikely companion. "She says that spirits speak to those who know how to listen. Tell me how to free you, Great One. Show me the way." As if in answer to her plea, the mountain lion lifted one massive paw and gestured, like a human pointing, toward a particular section of the trap's base. Following his direction, Nayeli discovered a hidden mechanism, a release catch concealed beneath layers of rust and dried blood. The work was hard for her small hands, and more than once she cut her fingers on the sharp edges of the trap. Each time she hissed in pain, the mountain lion would make that soft rumbling sound, as if offering comfort and encouragement. It was the strangest experience of her young life, working in partnership with a creature that should have been her natural enemy, united by the simple desire for freedom and survival. Time seemed suspended in that hidden canyon amphitheater. The sun climbed higher, sending shafts of golden light through the narrow opening above, while girl and mountain lion labored together against the iron bonds of human cruelty. Nayeli's fingers bled, her small muscles ached, and sweat beaded on her forehead, but she never once considered giving up. Finally, after what felt like hours, she heard the sweet sound of metal giving way, the trap's cruel mechanism released. With a groaning protest, and the iron door swung open on protesting hinges, the mountain lion did not immediately leap to freedom. Instead, he lay still for a long moment, as if unable to believe that his prison had truly opened. Then, with careful deliberation, he began to extract himself from the iron cage that had been his torture chamber. Nayeli stepped back, suddenly, aware that she was now alone in a narrow canyon, with one of the most powerful predators in all the Southwest. Every story her father had ever told her about mountain lion attacks flickered through her mind, and her body tensed for flight. But the great cat made no aggressive move. Instead, he rose to his full, imposing height, easily 4 feet at the shoulder, with a length that stretched nearly 8 feet from nose to tail tip, and simply stood there, swaying slightly from weakness and loss of blood. Then he did something that would be burned into Nayeli's memory for the rest of her life. The mountain lion, this king of the wilderness, who had never bowed to any creature in all his years of proud dominion, slowly lowered his magnificent head until his muzzle nearly touched the ground at Nayeli's feet. It was a gesture of gratitude so profound, so clearly intentional, that it left no doubt about the intelligence and awareness that burned behind those golden eyes. "You're welcome, Great One," Nayeli whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Run free now. Run far from the traps and the men who set them." The mountain lion raised his head and looked directly into her eyes. In that gaze, she saw something that would change her forever. Not just gratitude, but recognition of a bond that transcended the normal boundaries between human and animal. It was as if he was making a promise, though she could not yet understand what that promise might entail. With fluid grace despite his injuries, the mountain lion turned and bounded away, disappearing into the maze of red rock formations with barely a sound. Within moments, it was as if he had never been there at all, except for the blood-stained iron trap that stood as mute testimony to both human cruelty and the power of compassion to overcome it. Nayeli stood alone in the hidden canyon, her heart pounding with the magnitude of what had just occurred. She had saved the life of one of nature's most magnificent predators, but more than that, she had forged a connection that she instinctively knew would change her life in ways she could not yet imagine. As she began the long journey back to the settlement, the taste of her own blood from her cut fingers mixing with the salt of her tears, Nayeli carried with her the memory of golden eyes and the certain knowledge that this was only the beginning of something extraordinary. Nayeli returned to the settlement as the sun reached its peak, her small hands still bearing the cuts from the iron trap, and her heart carrying a secret that felt too large for her 7-year-old chest. She moved through the familiar routines of Apache daily life, helping her mother prepare the afternoon meal, practicing her beadwork with the other children, listening to the elders tell stories around the evening fire. But part of her remained in that hidden canyon, with golden eyes, and the memory of profound gratitude. Her family noticed the change immediately, though they could not identify its source. "You seem distant today, little daughter," her father observed, as they sat together mending fishing nets. His experienced eyes took in the small cuts on her hands, the way she kept glancing toward the northern canyon walls, the dreamlike quality that had settled over her features. "I was gathering plants with grandmother," Nayeli replied carefully, which was not entirely untrue, since she had intended to do so before the mountain lion's cries drew her deeper into the wilderness. But Itzel's sharp eyes missed nothing. She studied her granddaughter's face during the evening meal, noting the subtle changes that others might overlook, the new depth in the child's gaze, the way she held herself with slightly more maturity, the careful way she chose her words. Something significant had happened to Nayeli during her morning absence, something that had marked her in ways visible only to those who understood the deeper currents of spiritual experience. That night, as Nayeli lay on her sleeping robes listening to the desert's nocturnal symphony, she became aware of something that made her heart race with a mixture of excitement and wonder. There, silhouetted against the star-filled sky on the rim of the canyon wall, high above the settlement, stood a familiar figure. The mountain lion she had freed was watching over the Apache community, his massive form barely visible in the moonlight, but unmistakably present. She slipped from her family's dwelling and moved silently to the edge of the settlement, where she could see more clearly. The great cat remained motionless on his rocky perch, and when he became aware of her presence below, he made no move to retreat. Instead, he seemed to acknowledge her with a slight movement of his head, and around his neck, gleaming in the starlight, hung something that made Nayeli's breath catch in her throat, an eagle feather necklace, but not one made by human hands. The feathers were arranged with a precision and artistry that spoke of intelligence far beyond what any human attributed to animal minds. It was as if the mountain lion had crafted this token as a symbol of the bridge they had built between the human and animal worlds. Over the following days, the pattern established itself with subtle consistency. The mountain lion appeared on the canyon rim each evening, maintaining his silent vigil over the settlement. The Apache people remained unaware of their guardian, but small signs began to accumulate for those with eyes to see them. Children playing near the settlement's edges found themselves gently herded away from areas where rattlesnakes had been spotted. Hunting parties reported that dangerous game animals seemed unusually reluctant to approach the traditional grounds where Apache families gathered food and water. Scouts noted tracks of large predators that circled the settlement, but never approached close enough to pose a threat. Young Takala, whose sharp eyes and natural talent for tracking made him valuable to the tribe's scouts, was the first to notice the pattern of protection that surrounded their community. "Uncle Nalnish," he reported after returning from a scouting expedition, "something watches over us from the high places. I've found the tracks of a great mountain lion, but they circle our settlement like a guardian rather than approaching like a hunter. The sign is fresh each morning, as if he walks the perimeter through the night." Nayeli's father exchanged meaningful glances with the other warriors, understanding that such behavior was far from natural for the solitary predators of the canyon country. Mountain lions were territorial creatures who avoided human habitation, not guardians who appointed themselves protectors of Apache children. Meanwhile, disturbing news arrived with travelers from the outer settlements. A man calling himself Marcus Webb had appeared in the territorial capital, claiming to represent Eastern investors interested in developing the mineral rights of Apache lands. His surveyors had been spotted throughout the region, marking trees and mapping water sources with the methodical precision of men who intended to reshape the landscape to their own purposes. "They speak of progress," reported Chaska after meeting with emissaries from other Apache bands, "but their eyes hold the cold gleam of men who see the sacred earth as nothing more than a source of profit. They measure our mountains in terms of ore to be extracted, our rivers as power to be harnessed, our hunting grounds as grazing land for their cattle. The Apache council meetings grew longer and more tense as the implications of this new threat became clear. Unlike the individual settlers and ranchers they had dealt with in the past, Webb represented organized capital and political influence that could marshal the full power of territorial government against any Apache resistance. But even as the adults grappled with these mounting external pressures, Nayeli found herself drawn deeper into her secret relationship with the mountain lion guardian. She began to slip away during the day, following subtle signs that led her to secluded meeting places where the great cat would be waiting. These encounters defied everything she had been taught about the natural order. The mountain lion, whom she had begun to think of by the Apache name Kitanawa, meaning strong fighter, showed no sign of the wild aggression that should have characterized a creature of his size and power. Instead, he displayed a calm intelligence that seemed to recognize her as an equal partner in their unusual alliance. During their meetings, Kitanawa would communicate through a complex series of gestures, expressions, and vocalizations that Nayeli found herself understanding with increasing clarity. He showed her hidden paths through the canyon country, secret water sources known only to the wildlife, and observation points from which the movements of Webb's surveyors could be monitored without detection. Most remarkably, other canyon animals began to respond to Nayeli's presence with the same lack of fear they showed toward Kitanawa. Desert bighorn sheep would graze peacefully while she sat among them. Hawks and eagles would perch within arm's reach, studying her with bright, intelligent eyes. Even the traditionally skittish deer would approach close enough for her to touch. Their velvet noses. The change did not go unnoticed by her grandmother, whose lifetime of experience as a medicine woman had taught her to recognize the signs of spiritual awakening. "Child," Itzel said one evening as they worked together preparing medicinal herbs, "there are old stories among our people of those who could walk between the human world and the animal world. These gifted ones served as bridges, helping both sides understand the other's needs and fears. It is said that such individuals appear only in times of great change, when the balance between all living things is threatened." Nayeli's hands stilled in their work, and she looked up at her grandmother with eyes that suddenly seemed far older than her 7 years. "What happened to those bridge walkers, grandmother?" she asked quietly. "Some say they were blessed," Itzel replied, her weathered fingers gentle as they sorted through the dried plant materials. "Others say they were cursed to carry burdens too heavy for any single spirit to bear. But all agree that they were necessary, that without them, the harmony between human and animal would have been lost forever." That night, as Nayeli lay listening to the wind through the canyon walls, she felt the weight of destiny settling around her like an invisible cloak. Somewhere in the darkness above, she knew Kitanawa kept his vigil, watching over the settlement with golden eyes that reflected starlight like twin beacons of protective determination. The eagle feather necklace the mountain lion wore had become more than a symbol. It was a promise that the ancient covenant between Apache people and the spirits of the wild places would not be broken by the advancing tide of exploitation and development that threatened to engulf their world. Marcus Webb arrived in the territorial capital of Tucson like a storm front gathering on the horizon. His presence felt long before his intentions became clear. He was a man of average height but commanding presence, with steel-gray eyes that seemed to calculate the monetary value of everything they surveyed. His expensive Eastern clothing and polished mannerisms marked him as a representative of the powerful forces that were reshaping the American Southwest. But there was something in his bearing that suggested deeper, more personal motivations than mere profit. The worn leather journal he carried contained detailed maps and surveys of Apache territories, annotated with notes about mineral deposits, water rights, and strategic locations for railroad development. But tucked within its pages were older documents, faded photographs, and personal correspondence that hinted at a history far more complex than his public persona suggested. Gentlemen, Webb addressed the territorial officials gathered in the governor's ornate office. The Apache situation has persisted far too long. These people occupy some of the most valuable land in the territory, sitting on untapped mineral wealth that could fund schools, hospitals, and legitimate development for legitimate citizens. My investors are prepared to offer generous compensation for relocation services. Governor Mitchell, a pragmatic man who understood the political pressures of territorial advancement, studied the maps Webb had spread across his mahogany desk. The proposed development would indeed bring significant revenue to the territorial government, and the pressure from Washington to resolve the Indian question had been mounting steadily. The Apache bands have been relatively peaceful, the governor noted carefully. Any action would need to be justified to federal authorities. Webb's smile was cold and calculating. I'm sure we can find adequate justification. My scouts report unusual animal behavior in Apache territories, pack predators acting aggressively, coordinated attacks on survey teams. It seems these Indians have some method of directing wild animals against civilized settlement. Such primitive witchcraft represents a clear threat to public safety. Meanwhile, in the hidden canyons of Apache territory, the truth of Webb's accusations was manifesting in ways that would have surprised even him. Nayeli's bond with Kitanawa had indeed begun to extend beyond their individual relationship, creating a network of communication that encompassed much of the canyon's wildlife. During her secret meetings with the mountain lion, Nayeli discovered that her understanding of animal communication was expanding rapidly. What had begun as simple recognition of Kitanawa's gestures and expressions was evolving into something approaching true telepathic connection. She could sense his emotions, share his visual perspective, and even communicate complex ideas through a wordless exchange of thoughts and images. More remarkably, this ability was beginning to extend to other creatures, the ravens that served. As the canyon's natural scouts would bring her information about the movements of Webb's survey teams. Desert foxes would appear at her feet to lead her to important discoveries. Abandoned camps, hidden caches of surveying equipment, and evidence of activities that suggested Webb's men were engaged in more than legitimate land assessment. They're poisoning the water sources, Nayeli told Kitanawa during one of their clandestine meetings, sharing the images she had received from a family of coyotes who had witnessed the contamination. The men with the metal tools are putting bad medicine in the springs where our people drink. Kitanawa's response was a low growl that reverberated through his massive chest, and for the first time since their initial meeting, Nayeli glimpsed the fierce predator that lay beneath his gentle demeanor toward her. His golden eyes blazed with protective fury, and she understood that he was ready to take direct action against those who threatened the people he had appointed himself to guard. But even as their supernatural alliance grew stronger, the external pressures on the Apache community were intensifying. 3 children from outlying settlements had gone missing during routine hunting expeditions. Their disappearances blamed on wild animal attacks, though no bodies were ever found. Hunting parties reported encountering survey teams in areas where no legitimate development could occur, and several Apache scouts had been found dead under circumstances that suggested they had stumbled upon activities Webb's men preferred to keep secret. Nayeli's father, Naalnish, found himself at the center of increasingly urgent tribal council meetings, as the Apache leadership struggled to understand the nature of the new threats facing their people. These are not the random actions of individual settlers, he reported to the gathered elders. Someone coordinates these activities, someone with resources and authority we have not encountered before. The missing children, the poisoned springs, the harassment of our hunting parties, all of it serves to weaken our hold on traditional territories. Elder Chaska's ancient eyes reflected the weight of generations as he considered the implications. In the old stories, such times of crisis were often when the animal spirits chose champions among our people. Perhaps we should look for signs that the ancient alliances are awakening. Halona, The medicine woman had indeed been receiving visions that spoke of changes in the spiritual balance of the canyon country. Her dreams were filled with images of a child walking among great predators, of eagles carrying messages between earth and sky, of the sacred boundaries between human and animal consciousness dissolving in preparation for some great trial. Something walks among us that bridges the old world and the new, she told the council, her voice carrying the authority of one who had spent decades interpreting the spirit realm's communications. I sense a power awakening, something that may be our salvation or our destruction, depending on how we choose to guide it. Nayeli, unaware that she was the subject of such high-level spiritual speculation, was learning to navigate the complex responsibilities that came with her growing abilities. Gitanawa had begun teaching her about the secret geography of the canyon country, hidden paths that connected distant water sources, caves that could shelter large groups during harsh weather, and observation points that commanded views of every approach to traditional Apache territories. But perhaps most importantly, he was showing her the extent of the wildlife network that had begun to coalesce around their partnership. Mountain lions from distant territories were arriving to join what was becoming a coordinated defense of Apache lands. Ravens and hawks maintained constant surveillance of Webb's activities, reporting through a chain of animal communication that ultimately reached Nayeli and Kitanawa. The young Apache girl found herself becoming a translator between two worlds, interpreting the animals' observations of human activities and helping coordinate responses that protected both Apache interests and the wildlife that shared their ancestral lands. One evening, as she sat with Kitanawa on a rocky outcrop overlooking the settlement, a family of desert bighorn sheep approached with urgent information. Through the complex system of animal communication she was still learning to understand, Nayeli received images of Webb's men establishing a hidden camp in the sacred caves where Apache ancestors had left their spirit paintings. "They defile the holy places," she whispered to Kitanawa, her young voice tight with anger and grief. "They use our ancestors' caves to store their poison and their weapons." Kitanawa's response was immediate and decisive. He rose to his full imposing height and released a roar that echoed through the canyon like thunder, a sound that carried for miles and served as a rallying call to every predator within the mountain lion's expanding territory of influence. That night, Webb's hidden camp was visited by what his terrified men later described as a coordinated attack by every dangerous animal in the territory. Mountain lions prowled the perimeter, their eyes reflecting firelight like demonic stars. Coyotes howled in perfect harmony from the surrounding cliffs. Ravens and hawks circled overhead in numbers that blocked out the moon. No human was harmed. But when dawn broke, every piece of equipment had been destroyed, every cache of supplies scattered to the winds, and every man in the expedition had fled toward civilization with stories of supernatural revenge that would make rational officials question their sanity. Webb himself was not present during the attack, having remained in Tucson to coordinate the legal and political aspects of his campaign. But when his terrified subordinates brought word of the night's events, he knew he was facing something far more complex than simple Apache resistance. "Sir," his chief surveyor reported, his hands still shaking from the previous night's terror. It wasn't natural. The animals moved with purpose, with intelligence. It was like they were being directed by some unseen force. Webb's steel-gray eyes narrowed as he studied the man's frightened face. He had heard whispers of such things before, stories passed down from his own buried past about Apache medicine workers who could command the spirits of the wild places. The possibility that such powers might actually exist filled him with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. "Double the guard on all future expeditions," he ordered, "and send word to the territorial marshal. If these Indians are using some form of primitive witchcraft to coordinate animal attacks, it represents a clear threat to public safety. We'll need federal troops to deal with supernatural terrorism. But even as Webb escalated his campaign against the Apache people, the seeds of a larger conflict were being sown. Other native tribes throughout the territory had begun to report similar phenomena. Animals acting in coordinated defense of traditional lands, predators that seemed to understand human speech and respond to tribal spiritual practices. Word spread through the underground network of tribal communication that something extraordinary was happening in Apache territory, that the old alliances between human and animal were awakening after generations of dormancy. Spiritual leaders from distant tribes began making pilgrimages to consult with Apache medicine workers about the implications of these developments. For Nayeli, the weight of these larger implications remained largely hidden behind the simple reality of her growing friendship with Kitanawa and the expanding circle of animal allies who had accepted her as a bridge between their world and her own. She was still, in many ways, simply a 7-year-old girl who had been blessed with an extraordinary gift. But that gift was about to be tested in ways that would challenge everything she thought she understood about the relationship between human civilization and the natural world that sustained it. The sacred Apache war shield hung in the place of honor within the council lodge, its ancient hide surface painted with symbols that had protected the tribe's warriors for countless generations. The shield had belonged to great chiefs and medicine men passed down through bloodlines that stretched back to the time when the Apache first learned to read the language of wind and stone. Now, as tribal tensions mounted and supernatural forces stirred in the canyon country, Elder Chaska had brought forth this powerful artifact as a symbol of the spiritual resources available to defend their people. Marcus Webb's campaign of intimidation had escalated beyond mere surveying and land assessment. His mercenaries, rough men recruited from mining camps and cattle ranches, had begun a systematic harassment campaign designed to make Apache life untenable. Hunting parties were ambushed and their kills stolen. Water sources were fouled with industrial chemicals. Children were followed and threatened when they ventured beyond the immediate protection of the settlement. But Webb had underestimated the extent to which his actions were being observed and countered by forces he could neither understand nor control. Nayeli's secret relationship with Kitanawa had evolved into something approaching true telepathic partnership. When she placed her small hand on the mountain lion's massive head, their thoughts merged in a way that allowed her to see through his eyes, experience his heightened senses, and share the ancient predator wisdom that guided his actions. Through this connection, she had gained access to a network of animal intelligence that spanned the entire canyon ecosystem. The ravens brought her aerial reconnaissance of Webb's movements. The coyotes reported on hidden camps and supply caches. The desert bighorn sheep, with their ability to traverse impossible terrain, served as messengers between distant animal communities. Even the insects and smaller creatures contributed information, creating a surveillance network far more comprehensive than any human organization could achieve. But the most significant development was the arrival of other mountain lions, drawn by Kitanawa's territorial calls and the spiritual energy that surrounded his partnership with the Apache child. These were not young lions seeking to challenge an established territory, but mature adults who seemed to recognize that something unprecedented was occurring in the canyon country. There are now 6 great cats hunting in coordination, Takala reported to the tribal council after his latest scouting expedition. I have found their tracks circling our territory in patterns that suggest organized patrol routes. And the deer, rabbits, and other prey animals show no fear. It is as if the predators have taken on a different purpose than hunting for food. Nalnish listened to these reports with a mixture of wonder and growing concern. As a warrior and hunter, he understood animal behavior well enough to know that what Takala described was impossible according to natural law. Yet the evidence was undeniable. and the protection it provided to Apache families was very real. Perhaps, he said carefully, we should consider that the spirits of our ancestors are manifesting through the creatures of the wild places. In times of great danger, the old stories speak of such alliances. It was Grandmother Itzel who finally voiced the suspicion that had been growing in her heart for weeks. "The change began with my granddaughter," she said quietly, her weathered hands folding protectively around the medicine pouch that had guided her family for generations. Since the day she returned from the deep canyon with cuts on her hands and secrets in her eyes, the animals have behaved differently. I believe Nayeli walks between the worlds, as the bridge speakers did in the time of our great-grandmothers. The council lodge fell silent as the implications of this statement settled over the gathered elders. If Itzel was correct, if Nayeli had indeed manifested the legendary ability to communicate with animal spirits, then she represented both their greatest hope for survival and their most vulnerable point of attack. Elder Chaska rose slowly and approached the sacred war shield, his ancient hands tracing the protective symbols that generations of spiritual leaders had empowered with their prayers and ceremonies. "If this child carries such a gift," he said solemnly, "then she must be properly prepared for the responsibilities that come with it. The old knowledge must be awakened, the ancient ceremonies must be performed, and she must learn to control powers that could easily destroy her if left untrained." That evening, as shadows lengthened across the settlement and the first stars appeared in the desert sky, Nayeli was summoned to a gathering that would change her life forever. The tribal council, accompanied by Helona the medicine woman and several visiting spiritual leaders from allied bands, had assembled in the sacred lodge to formally acknowledge what many had already suspected. "Child," Chaska said gently, his voice carrying the weight of ceremonial authority, "we know that you have been chosen by the animal spirits to serve as a bridge between our world and theirs. This is a great honor, but also a great burden. Are you prepared to accept the responsibilities that come with such a gift?" Nayeli looked around the circle of faces, her parents, her grandmother, the elders who had guided her since birth, and saw in their expressions a mixture of love, pride, and deep concern. She was only 7 years old, but the events of recent weeks had forced her to mature beyond her years. "I want to help protect our people," she said simply. "Kitanawa and the other animals, they want to help too, but I don't always understand what they're trying to tell me." Helona stepped forward, carrying a bundle of sacred items that had been prepared for this moment. Among them was a crystal unlike any Nayeli had ever seen, a piece of pure quartz that seemed to pulse with inner light, as if it contained captured starfire. "This is an ancient Apache spirit stone," the medicine woman explained. "It has been used for generations to amplify the connection between human consciousness and the spirit world. With proper training and the right ceremonies, it will help you understand and control the voices of the animal spirits." As Helona placed the crystal in Nayeli's small hands, the child felt a surge of energy that made her gasp with surprise. Suddenly, the animal voices that had been growing steadily louder in her mind became clear and distinct. She could hear Kitanawa's thoughts from his position on the canyon rim above the settlement. She could sense the presence of the other mountain lions, the watchful ravens, the entire network of wildlife allies that had begun to organize themselves around her unusual gift. But with this expanded awareness came the realization of how much danger her people truly faced. Through the enhanced animal communication network, she could perceive Webb's forces marshalling for a major assault, gathering weapons and mercenaries for an attack that would come soon, under cover of darkness, with the intention of driving the Apache from their ancestral lands once and for all. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice carrying new authority and urgency. "The bad men with the iron tools and the poison water. They plan to attack when the moon is dark, in 3 nights' time." The silver Apache peace pipe gleamed in the firelight as Elder Chaska prepared it for the ceremony that would formally link Nayeli to the ancestral spirits who guided her people's relationship with the natural world. The pipe had been carved from sacred stone by Apache craftsmen 3 generations past, its surface inlaid with symbols that told the story of the first bridge speakers and their covenant with the animal kingdoms. Webb's mercenary army was gathering, strength with each passing day, recruiting from the roughest elements of frontier society, men who saw Apache removal not as political necessity, but as an opportunity for violence and profit. Their camp, established in the ruins of an abandoned mining settlement 20 miles from Apache territory, had grown into a small fortress equipped with military-grade weapons and led by veterans of the Indian Wars who brought professional expertise. To what had begun as a civilian land grab, "We have 43 men now," reported Sergeant Dutch Muller, a scarred veteran of campaigns against the Lakota and Cheyenne, mix of cavalry veterans, mining company guards, and freelance Indian fighters. They're well-armed and motivated by the bounty you're offering for each Apache scalp. Webb studied the tactical maps spread across his field table, noting the defensive advantages of the canyon terrain and the difficulties it would present for conventional military assault. But he had learned from his subordinates' earlier encounters, with mysteriously coordinated animal attacks, and his current strategy took those supernatural elements into account. "The animals respond to some form of Apache witchcraft," he told his assembled officers. "Our priority target must be whoever serves as their spiritual leader, probably an elderly medicine man or woman. Once we eliminate the source of their supernatural protection, the rest will scatter like any other primitive tribe." What Webb did not realize was that his every word was being overheard by a pair of ravens perched in the skeletal remains of the mining camp's water tower. Their sharp intelligence focused on gathering information for the expanding network of animal allies that served Nayeli's growing abilities. Back in Apache territory, the formal training of the young bridge speaker had begun under the combined guidance of Elder Chaska, medicine woman Halona, and visiting spiritual leaders who had traveled from distant bands to witness the awakening of powers not seen for generations. The ancient spirit stone amplified Nayeli's natural abilities, allowing her to maintain clear communication with Kitanawa and the growing number of animal allies even when separated by great distances. "The gift you carry comes with great responsibility," Halona explained as they worked together in the sacred lodge, surrounded by ceremonial items that connected them to centuries of Apache spiritual tradition. "The animal spirits have their own wisdom, their own purposes that may not always align with human needs. You must learn to guide them without commanding them, to request their aid without demanding their sacrifice." Through her enhanced connection with the wildlife network, Nayeli was learning the true extent of the threat Webb represented. His mercenaries were not simply planning to drive the Apache from their lands. They intended wholesale slaughter designed to terrorize other tribes, into abandoning any resistance to white expansion. Women and children would not be spared, sacred sites would be desecrated, and the survivors would be sold into slavery or shipped to distant reservations, where they would die slowly of disease and despair. But the animal allies had begun to organize themselves for defense in ways that defied natural behavior. Kitanawa had established a hierarchy among the mountain lions, with each great cat taking responsibility for protecting specific areas of Apache territory. The ravens served as an aerial reconnaissance network, maintaining constant surveillance of Webb's forces and carrying messages between distant animal communities. Even traditionally, solitary creatures like bears and wolves had begun coordinating their activities in service of the larger defensive strategy. "There are now 12 great cats," Takala reported after his latest scouting mission. "They patrol in groups of 3, covering every approach to our territory. And the other animals, it's like they're all part of some vast organization. I watched a golden eagle direct a pack of coyotes to investigate strange tracks, then saw the coyotes report back to a family of foxes who carried the information toward the sacred caves. Nayeli's father, Nayeli, found himself in the unprecedented position of coordinating human and animal defense strategies. His warrior's instincts told him that conventional Apache tactics would be insufficient against Webb's superior numbers and firepower, but the supernatural allies presented possibilities that no military manual had ever contemplated. If the animals can coordinate their attacks with our human defenders, he told the War Council, we might be able to compensate for our disadvantage in weapons and numbers. But such coordination would require communication abilities beyond anything our people have ever attempted. It was then that Nayeli stepped forward, the spirit stone pulsing with gentle light in her small hands, her young voice carrying new authority born of her growing mastery over powers that connected her to every living thing in the canyon ecosystem. I can do it, she said simply. Kitanawa and I, we can talk to all of them now. The eagles can watch from the sky and tell us where the bad men are coming from. The mountain lions can attack from the high rocks while our warriors fight from the ground. The coyotes can make noise to confuse the enemy, and the ravens can carry messages faster than any human runner. The adults in the council lodge exchanged glances that mixed amazement with deep concern. They were contemplating a form of warfare that had existed only in the oldest legends, a collaboration between human intelligence and animal instinct that could either save their people or lead to catastrophic failure. Elder Chaska rose slowly and approached the sacred war shield, its ancient symbols seeming to glow with reflected firelight. In the time of our ancestors, he said solemnly, such alliances were forged only in the most desperate circumstances, when the very survival of our people hung in the balance. The spirits of the wild places do not give their aid lightly, and the price of failure is measured not just in human lives, but in the breaking of sacred covenants that bind our world together. He turned to face Nayeli, his ancient eyes reflecting both the wisdom of ages and the terrible weight of the decision they were contemplating. Child, are you prepared to risk not only your own life, but the spiritual balance of everything our people hold sacred? Nayeli looked around the circle of faces, her parents, her grandmother, the elders and warriors who had protected her since birth, and saw in their expressions the love and trust that had shaped her young life. But she also saw the fear and uncertainty that came with facing forces beyond their previous experience. Kitanawa says the mountain remembers, she replied, her words carrying echoes of ancient wisdom channeled through her connection to the great. Cat's memories. Long ago, when the first Apache came to this place, they made promises to the spirits of the wild things. The animals have kept their part of the bargain. Now it's time for us to keep ours. The faded daguerreotype photograph lay hidden beneath layers of surveying maps and territorial documents in Marcus Webb's private journal. Its edges yellowed with age and its surface cracked from years of careful handling. In the image, barely visible through the chemical fog of early photography, stood a young Apache boy of perhaps 5 years, wearing traditional clothing and holding the hand of an elderly Apache woman whose face bore the distinctive tattoos of a tribal medicine keeper. Nayeli discovered the photograph during a daring reconnaissance mission that took her deep into Webb's headquarters camp, while Kitanawa and the other mountain lions created a diversion on the opposite side of the settlement. Her enhanced animal communication abilities had allowed her to coordinate with the ravens, who served as aerial scouts, timing her infiltration to coincide with the changing of the guards and the brief window when Webb's personal quarters would be undefended. What she found in that worn leather journal would change everything. The photograph was not the only evidence of Webb's hidden past. Beneath it lay documents written in a mixture of English and Apache script, correspondence between territorial officials and Indian agents, and most shocking of all, a birth certificate that identified Marcus Webb as Nayeli Tahoma, born to the White Mountain Apache in 1842 and listed as deceased presumed dead in a raid report dated 1847. Through her telepathic connection with Kitanawa, Nayeli shared these discoveries with the great mountain lion, whose ancient memories suddenly blazed with recognition and anguish. The images that flowed between them painted a devastating picture of tragedy and loss that explained both Webb's hatred of his own people and the mountain lion's inexplicable familiarity with the man who now threatened Apache survival. 35 years earlier, during the brutal cavalry raids that had driven many Apache bands from their traditional territories, a 5-year-old boy named Nayeli Tahoma had been separated from his family during a dawn attack on their winter camp. The soldiers, following standard protocol for dealing with hostile Indian children, had taken the boy to a territorial orphanage where his Apache identity was systematically erased through a process designed to civilize native children by destroying their cultural connections. Kitanawa had been little more than a cub then, part of a family of mountain lions that had lived in harmony with the Apache band. The great cat's memories revealed that he had actually tried to protect the young Apache boy during the raid, fighting desperately against the soldiers before being wounded and left for dead. For 35 years, he had carried the guilt of his failure to save the child who had grown up to become their greatest enemy. But the most devastating revelation came when Nayeli realized that the elderly Apache woman in the photograph was her own great-grandmother, and that Marcus Webb, the man orchestrating the destruction of their people, was actually her cousin, the lost son of her father's uncle, who had been mourned as dead for over 3 decades. The implications of this discovery hit Nayeli like a physical blow. Through her enhanced connection to the animal network, she could sense the emotional upheaval it created among her allies. The ravens carried news of her findings to the Apache settlement, where the tribal council was forced to confront the impossible truth that their most dangerous enemy was actually one of their own children, stolen and corrupted by the very system they were now fighting to resist. "It cannot be," Nayeli whispered, when Nayeli's reconnaissance revealed the truth to the assembled council. "My uncle's son died in the raid at Skeleton Canyon. We mourned him, we sang the death songs, we honored his spirit's journey to the ancestor lands. But Elder Chaska, whose long memory encompassed many tragedies and unexpected revelations, studied the evidence with the careful attention of one who had learned not to reject truth simply because it challenged accepted understanding. The boy's body was never found," he said quietly. "The soldiers claimed they buried all the dead, but when our people returned to search the battleground, we found signs that some had been taken alive. Perhaps what we thought was death was actually a different kind of destruction. The killing of an Apache soul while leaving the human body to serve our enemy's purposes." Helona, the medicine woman, experienced visions that confirmed the council's worst fears. In her spiritual communion with the ancestral spirits, she saw the systematic process by which the territorial authorities had transformed Apache children into weapons against their own people. Names were changed, languages forbidden, cultural memories erased through a combination of punishment and indoctrination designed to create Native Americans who would serve white interests against their own tribes. "He has forgotten who he is," she reported to the gathering, her voice heavy with the weight of spiritual revelation. But the forgetting was not complete. Deep in his spirit, the Apache identity still lives, buried beneath years of pain and false teachings. That is why he hates us so intensely, because we remind him of everything he was forced to abandon. The discovery of Webb's true identity created a crisis within the Apache community that went far beyond military strategy. How could they fight against one of their own children even one who had been corrupted by their enemies. How could they justify using supernatural allies to destroy a man who was himself a victim of the same forces that now threatened their survival? But it was Kitanawa who provided the most crucial insight into Webb's psychology and motivations. Through his shared memories with Nayeli, the mountain lion revealed that Webb's campaign against the Apache was not driven solely by greed or loyalty to his white benefactors. Instead, it was the desperate action of a man trying to destroy the evidence of his own traumatic past, to eliminate the people whose very existence reminded him of the identity that had been torn away from him in childhood. He seeks to kill the Apache child within himself by killing all Apache children, Nayeli explained to the council, her young voice carrying wisdom channeled through her supernatural connection to ancient animal memories. But Kitanawa says that wounded spirits can sometimes be healed if the healing comes from those who remember who they truly are. The revelation transformed the nature of their conflict from a simple battle for survival into something far more complex, a struggle to reclaim a lost soul while defending against the very real threat that soul's corruption posed to their community. Webb's mercenary army remained a deadly danger, but now the Apache people faced the additional challenge of finding a way to save their enemy from himself without allowing that compassion to destroy them all. Perhaps, Elder Chaska said slowly, this is why the animal spirits chose to awaken the old alliances at this time, not simply to defend our territory, but to heal a wound that has been festering in the heart of our people for a generation. As night fell over the canyon country and the first stars appeared in the clear desert sky, Nayeli sat with Kitanawa on their familiar rocky outcrop, both of them grappling with the magnitude of what they had discovered. The great mountain lions. Memories carried not just the trauma of his failure to protect the Apache child 35 years ago, but also the recognition that he now had a chance for redemption. We can't just fight him, Nayeli said quietly, her small hand resting on Kitanawa's massive head. We have to find a way to remind him who he really is. But how do you heal someone who doesn't want to be healed? The mountain lion's response came not in words, but in images and emotions that conveyed the ancient wisdom of creatures who understood that some battles could only be won through patience, compassion, and the willingness to risk everything for the chance to restore broken connections. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as Webb's forces prepared for their final assault, but tonight, under the infinite stars of the desert sky, an Apache child and a mountain lion planned not just for war, but for the possibility of redemption. The ancient Apache spirit stone pulsed with ethereal light as Nayeli held it during the sacred ceremony that would forge the final links between human and animal defenders. The crystal seemed to contain captured starfire, its inner radiance growing stronger as the spiritual connection between the 7-year-old bridge speaker and her supernatural allies reached unprecedented depths of communication and coordination. Around the ceremonial fire, Apache warriors painted themselves with traditional war symbols while medicine women chanted protective songs that had not been heard in these canyons for generations. The sacred war paint, pigments mixed with clay from the holy places and blessed with prayers to the ancestral spirits, connected each fighter to the spiritual strength of their forebears while marking them as participants in a battle that would determine the fate of Apache people for generations to come. Elder Chaska stood before the assembled defenders, the sacred war shield gleaming in the firelight as he spoke words that had been passed down through oral tradition since the time when Apache warriors first learned to coordinate their tactics with the natural world that surrounded them. Tonight, we fight not just for our land, but for our very souls, he declared, his ancient voice carrying across the gathered crowd. Our enemies seek to destroy not only our bodies, but our connection to the spirits that have guided our people since the world was young. We go into battle knowing that defeat means not just death, but the breaking of sacred covenants that bind our people to this place. Through her enhanced telepathic connection with Kitanawa, Nayeli could sense the mountain lion marshalling his forces on the rocky heights above the settlement. 12 great cats now answered to his leadership, each one a formidable predator capable of taking down multiple human opponents. But more than their physical prowess, these mountain lions brought supernatural coordination that allowed them to function as a unified military force rather than individual hunters. The aerial reconnaissance network provided by the Ravens had given the Apache defenders detailed intelligence about Webb's approaching army. 43 mercenaries armed with military rifles, cavalry sabers, and even a small cannon they had acquired from an abandoned army depot. The force was led by experienced Indian fighters who understood Apache tactics and had planned their assault to neutralize traditional defensive advantages. But Webb's military advisors had no experience dealing with an enemy that could coordinate human intelligence with animal instinct, that could use supernatural communication to maintain perfect information about enemy movements, and that could deploy predators as tactical weapons in support of conventional warfare. They approach from 3 directions, Takala reported after returning from his final scouting mission. The main force comes up the canyon from the south, while smaller groups move to block our escape routes to the east and west. They plan to surround us and force a battle on ground of their choosing. Nayeli closed her eyes and allowed her consciousness to merge more completely with Kitanawa's supernatural awareness. Through the great cat's enhanced senses, she could perceive the approaching enemy forces with a clarity that no human scout could achieve. She smelled the gun oil and sweat of nervous men, heard the whispered conversations of soldiers preparing for what they expected to be a routine massacre, felt the fear and anticipation that rippled through ranks of mercenaries who had been told they were fighting primitive savages armed with bows and arrows. What Webb's forces did not realize was that they were walking into a carefully prepared killing ground where every rock formation, every hidden path, every natural shelter had been incorporated into a defensive strategy that combined Apache tactical brilliance with supernatural coordination. The mountain lions will take the high ground, Nayeli explained to the War Council, her young voice carrying the authority of one who spoke for forces beyond human understanding. When the bad men enter the narrow parts of the canyon, Kitanawa and his pack will attack from above while our warriors engage from the front. The ravens will carry messages between our groups so everyone knows what's happening, and the coyotes will use their voices to confuse the enemy about our numbers and positions. Her father, Nal Nish, studied the tactical situation with the experienced eye of a warrior who had survived many battles against overwhelming odds. The plan was audacious beyond anything Apache fighters had ever attempted, requiring a level of coordination between human and animal forces that existed only in the oldest legends. "Daughter," he said quietly, placing a protective hand on her small shoulder, "such coordination will require you to maintain contact with dozens of animal minds simultaneously while the battle rages around you. The spiritual strain could destroy you even if the fighting does not." But Nayeli's connection to the Spirit Stone had revealed capabilities that even she was only beginning to understand. The ancient crystal did not simply amplify her natural abilities. It connected her to the accumulated spiritual energy of countless Apache medicine workers who had faced similar crises throughout their people's history. "The grandmothers are with me," she said simply, touching the glowing stone that hung around her neck. "All the bridge speakers who came before, all the women who learned to talk with the animal spirits, they're all here, helping me carry this burden." As the hours passed and the enemy forces drew closer, the final preparations took on an almost dreamlike quality. Apache families who could not fight were evacuated to hidden caves in the deepest parts of the canyon, protected by natural barriers and watched over by the most formidable of the mountain lions. Weapons were blessed by medicine women. Defensive positions were sanctified with prayers to the protective spirits, and the youngest warriors received final instructions from elders who might not survive to see another dawn. Halona, the medicine woman, approached Nayeli with a ceremonial crown woven from golden eagle feathers, a sacred artifact that marked the formal recognition of her role as a spiritual leader, despite her youth. The crown had belonged to legendary Apache leaders of the past, worn only during the most important ceremonies and times of greatest crisis. "This belonged to your great-great-grandmother," Halona said, as she placed the feathered crown on Nayeli's head. "She was the last of the bridge speakers before you, and she wore this crown when she led our people against the Spanish conquistadors 2 centuries ago. Tonight, you carry not just your own power, but the accumulated strength of all the women who have stood between our people and destruction." The weight of the crown was negligible, but the spiritual responsibility it represented felt almost crushing to the young girl who found herself at the center of events that would reshape the relationship between Apache people and the natural world they called home. Through her connection with Kitanawa, Nayeli became aware of movement in the darkness beyond the settlement's perimeter. Webb's forces were beginning their final approach, moving with the careful precision of professional soldiers who expected to achieve complete surprise against an unsuspecting enemy. What they encountered instead was a reception committee of supernatural allies who had been tracking their every movement for hours. The first sign of trouble came when the advance scouts reported that their horses were becoming increasingly agitated, shying away from certain paths and refusing to approach areas that appeared perfectly safe. The animals could sense the presence of predators in numbers far beyond anything that should have existed in the territory, and their instinctive fear communicated itself to the human riders who depended on them. "Something's wrong, Sergeant," Muller reported to Webb as the main force paused in a sheltered valley less than a mile from the Apache settlement. "The horses are spooked, and my men are reporting signs of large predators, mountain lion tracks, but too many of them and too fresh. It's like every big cat in the territory has gathered in these canyons." Webb studied the reports with the cold calculation that had made him successful in his campaign against Apache resistance. He had anticipated that his enemy might attempt to use trained animals in their defense, but the scale of what his scouts were describing went far beyond anything in his experience. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "it's time to discover just how far Apache witchcraft can protect them against modern weapons and military discipline." As the first light of dawn began to illuminate the eastern horizon, both sides prepared for a confrontation that would be remembered in Apache oral tradition for generations to come. On one side stood the accumulated military might of territorial expansion, disciplined soldiers with superior weapons and the backing of governmental authority. On the other side waited a small group of Apache defenders allied with supernatural forces that had not been seen in the American Southwest since the time of the first Spanish explorers. Nayeli took her position on a rocky ledge that overlooked the main canyon approach, the spirit stone glowing with increasing intensity as her consciousness expanded to encompass the entire network of animal allies who had pledged their lives to defend her people. Through her enhanced awareness, she could sense Webb himself approaching with the main force, and for the first time she felt the full weight of the spiritual wound that drove him to destroy everything that reminded him of his stolen Apache identity. The pain radiating from Webb's suppressed memories was so intense that it nearly overwhelmed her connection to the Spirit Stone. She saw flashes of the terrified 5-year-old boy he had been, torn from his family and forced to watch as soldiers burned the only world he had ever known. She felt his years of confusion and anguish in the territorial orphanage, where Apache children were beaten for speaking their native language and punished for maintaining any connection to their cultural identity. But beneath the layers of trauma and rage, she also sensed something else, a deep longing for the spiritual connection he had lost, a hunger for the peace and belonging that his artificial white identity could never truly provide. The man approaching with murder in his heart was still, somewhere in the deepest recesses of his wounded soul, an Apache child crying for his grandmother's comfort. "Kitanawa," she whispered to the great mountain lion who crouched beside her on the rocky ledge. "Can you help me reach him? Can you help me show him who he really is before it's too late?" The mountain lion's response came as a flood of images and emotions that spoke of redemption, healing, and the possibility that even the most damaged spirits could be restored if approached with enough wisdom and compassion. But those images were tempered with the realistic understanding that Webb's mercenary army would not pause for spiritual healing, that the battle about to begin would require all their strength and cunning simply to survive. As the sun climbed higher and the canyon walls began to glow with reflected light, the final moments of preparation gave way to the terrible anticipation that preceded all great battles. Apache warriors checked their weapons one last time, medicine women completed their protective rituals, and the supernatural allies took their positions according to the battle plan that Nayeli had coordinated through her connection to the animal network. The golden eagle feather crown caught the morning light as Nayeli raised the spirit stone above her head, its crystalline surface blazing with energy that connected her to every living creature within the canyon ecosystem. Through this expanded consciousness, she felt the presence of her ancestors, the accumulated wisdom of generations of Apache leaders who had faced impossible odds and found ways to protect their people through combinations of courage, cunning, and spiritual power. "Today we fight not just for our survival," she called out to the assembled defenders, her young voice carrying with supernatural clarity across the canyon, "but for the soul of our lost brother who leads our enemies. We go into battle with the strength of all our ancestors, guided by the spirits of the wild places, united with allies who remember the old covenants between human and animal." The battle that was about to begin would test every alliance, challenge every assumption about the relationship between civilization and wilderness, and determine whether the ancient ways could survive in a world increasingly dominated by those who saw the natural world as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. As Webb's forces entered the narrow approach to the canyon, moving with the confident precision of soldiers who expected to face only primitive resistance, they had no idea that they were walking into a trap designed by minds that could think like both human strategists and hunting predators, coordinated by spiritual forces that transcended the normal boundaries between species. The first shots of the battle were only minutes away, but already the outcome would depend not just on superior tactics or supernatural allies, but on whether a wounded Apache soul could remember who he truly was before his pain destroyed everything his people held sacred. The blazing Apache war paint on Nalnish's face caught the morning sunlight as he raised his rifle and fired the first shot of the battle, the crack of gunpowder echoing off canyon walls like thunder in the confined space. The bullet found its mark in the chest of Webb's lead scout, and suddenly the quiet canyon erupted into chaos as 43 mercenaries discovered they had walked into a carefully prepared killing ground. Kitanawa's roar split the air like a primordial war cry as he led 11 other mountain lions in a coordinated assault from the rocky heights above the advancing enemy. The great cats moved with supernatural coordination, each one targeting specific soldiers according to a battle plan that had been communicated through Nayeli's telepathic network. Their golden eyes blazed with protective fury as they launched themselves from impossible heights, using their natural climbing abilities to attack from angles no human military tactician had ever anticipated. Through her connection to the Spirit Stone, Nayeli maintained simultaneous contact with dozens of animal minds while coordinating the human defensive positions. Ravens circled overhead, their harsh cries carrying tactical information between separated groups of Apache warriors. Coyote packs positioned throughout the canyon added their voices to create an auditory landscape of confusion that made it impossible for Webb's forces to accurately judge the number and location of their enemies. "They're everywhere," Sergeant Muller shouted over the chaos, his military experience useless against an enemy that seemed to attack from the rocks themselves. "It's not natural. These animals are coordinated like they're following orders." Webb himself had taken cover behind a boulder formation, his steel-gray eyes scanning the canyon walls for targets while his mind struggled to process what he was witnessing. The Apache resistance was unlike anything in his extensive experience with Indian warfare. The coordination between human fighters and animal predators suggested a level of supernatural organization that challenged his rational understanding of the world. But it was the voice that reached him through the battle's chaos that truly shook his carefully constructed sense of identity. "Nal Nish Tahoma," Nayeli called out, her words carried by the wind and amplified by the Spirit Stone's power. "Lost child of the White Mountain Apache, remember who you were before they stole your name." The sound of his original Apache name hit Webb like a physical blow, awakening memories he had spent 35 years trying to suppress. For a moment, the hardened land developer saw himself as the terrified 5-year-old boy who had watched soldiers destroy his family's winter camp, who had cried for his grandmother in a language he was later forbidden to speak. His momentary confusion created an opening that Kitanawa exploited with predatory precision. The great mountain lion bounded across the rocky terrain with fluid grace, his massive form silhouetted against the sky as he leaped toward the man who had once been the Apache child he had failed to protect decades earlier. But instead of attacking, with claws and fangs, Kitanawa did something that froze every combatant in the immediate area with sheer impossibility. The mountain lion stopped mere feet from Webb and simply sat, his golden eyes locked on the man's face with an expression of recognition and profound sadness. Webb's rifle shook in his hands as he stared into eyes that carried memories of his childhood. Memories of a time when he had played beside mountain streams while great cats watched from the shadows, when the boundary between human and animal had been bridged by mutual respect and understanding. "I know you," Webb whispered, his voice barely audible over the continuing battle. "You were there when they came. You tried to protect us." The mountain lion's response was a soft, rumbling sound that spoke of forgiveness, understanding, and the possibility of redemption even for souls that had lost their way. In that moment, the sophisticated land developer and military strategist disappeared, leaving only a wounded Apache child who had spent a lifetime running from the trauma of his stolen identity. Around them, the battle continued with increasing intensity. Apache warriors used their intimate knowledge of the canyon terrain to maximum advantage, appearing from hidden positions to strike at enemy flanks before vanishing back into the maze of red rock formations. The mountain lions had eliminated nearly a dozen mercenaries in their initial assault, while the coordinated animal harassment was breaking down military discipline among men who had expected to face primitive resistance. But Webb's mercenary army was composed of experienced Indian fighters who adapted quickly to unexpected tactics. They began concentrating their fire on the animal allies, recognizing that eliminating the supernatural coordination would restore their advantages in numbers and firepower. The crack of rifles echoed repeatedly as disciplined volleys targeted, the ravens circling overhead and the mountain lions moving through the rocky heights. The supernatural alliance that had seemed invincible in the early moments of the battle began to suffer casualties that threatened to break the telepathic network holding the entire defensive strategy together. It was then that Marcus Webb, Nalnish, Tahoma, made the decision that would determine not only the battle's outcome but the fate of his own tortured soul. Rising from his defensive position, he turned his rifle not on the Apache defenders, but on his own mercenary army. His voice, carrying across the canyon with the authority of a man who had suddenly remembered who he truly was. The golden eagle feather crown blazed with ethereal light as Nayeli's consciousness expanded beyond anything she had previously experienced, her spirit merging so completely with Kitanawa's that the boundary between human and mountain lion temporarily dissolved. Through this transcendent connection, she could perceive the entire battlefield as if from multiple viewpoints simultaneously, seeing through the eyes of every raven, feeling the heartbeat of every mountain lion, sensing the movements of every Apache warrior. "Stand down!" Webb shouted to his mercenary army, his rifle now pointed at Sergeant Muller instead of at the Apache defenders. "These are my people. This is my family." The transformation in Webb's demeanor was so complete, so sudden, that many of his men hesitated in confusion rather than following his orders. 35 years of carefully constructed identity had crumbled in moments, replaced by memories of an Apache childhood that flooded back with overwhelming intensity. Mueller, seeing his employer's apparent betrayal, raised his own weapon. "You've lost your mind, Webb. These savages have bewitched you somehow." The sergeant's rifle never fired. Kitanawa, moving with supernatural speed, struck the man down before he could complete his aim. But the great mountain lion's intervention was coordinated with a broader strategy that encompassed the entire canyon battlefield. At the moment of Webb's transformation, Nayeli's enhanced abilities reached their peak. Through her merger with Kitanawa's consciousness, she broadcast a telepathic command that unified every animal ally in a coordinated assault designed not to kill, but to overwhelm and scatter the remaining mercenary forces. Mountain lions appeared. On every ridge surrounding the canyon, their roars echoing off stone walls in a symphony of predatory dominance. Ravens descended in clouds so thick they blocked the sun, their wings and claws striking at weapons and equipment rather than human targets. Coyote packs emerged from hidden positions to create a cacophony of howls that seemed to come from everywhere. At once, the psychological impact was devastating. Hardened Indian fighters who had faced Apache resistance for years found themselves confronting something beyond their experience, a supernatural alliance that turned the very landscape against them. Animals that should have fled from human presence instead attacked with coordinated intelligence, as if the desert itself had awakened to drive out invaders. "This ain't natural," one mercenary screamed as he fled toward the canyon mouth, his rifle abandoned in his haste to escape the nightmare the battle had become. They got demons fighting for them. Within minutes, the mercenary army that had approached with such confidence was in full retreat, their discipline shattered by encounters with forces that challenged everything they thought they understood about warfare. The survivors fled toward the territorial capital, carrying stories that would be dismissed as hysteria, but would contribute to growing legends about Apache supernatural powers. Webb, Nalnish Tahoma, stood among the scattered equipment of his defeated army, his expensive eastern clothing torn and bloodied, his steel-grey eyes now reflecting the depth of spiritual awakening rather than cold calculation. Kitanawa approached him slowly, the great mountain lion's posture conveying not threat but welcome, the recognition of a lost family member who had finally found his way home. "I remember now," Webb said quietly, his voice carrying the wonder of a man rediscovering his own identity. "I remember the songs my grandmother sang, the stories about the animal spirits, the feeling of belonging to something larger than myself." Nayeli, her consciousness gradually separating from its merger with Kitanawa, approached the man who had been their greatest enemy and was now, potentially, their salvation. The spirit stone around her neck pulsed with gentle warmth, its crystalline structure reflecting the peace that was settling over the canyon as the sounds of battle faded into memory. "Welcome home, cousin," she said simply, using the Apache words that recognized family connections, transcending individual trauma and loss. The Apache warriors, who had survived the battle, gathered around this unlikely reunion, their faces reflecting mixtures of amazement, relief, and cautious hope. They had witnessed not just a military victory, but a spiritual healing that restored one of their own children to the community that had mourned his loss for decades. Elder Chaska, his ancient frame supported by a walking stick carved from sacred wood, approached the group with the measured dignity of one who had lived long enough to witness many impossible things. In his eyes was the recognition that this moment represented more than the resolution of immediate danger. It marked the beginning of a new chapter in the relationship between Apache people and the forces that threatened their survival. Chata, spirits work in ways that human minds cannot always understand, he said, his words carrying the weight of ceremonial authority. What appeared to be our destruction has become our renewal. What seemed like our greatest enemy has revealed himself as our lost brother. The canyon itself seemed to exhale with relief as the supernatural tension that had built around the conflict began to dissipate. The mountain lions remained visible on the rocky heights, but their posture had shifted from aggressive readiness to watchful protection. The ravens continued to circle overhead, but their harsh cries had become melodic calls that spoke of victory and homecoming rather than war and death. As the sun reached its peak and began its descent toward the western horizon, the Apache people faced a future transformed by events that would be remembered in their oral traditions for generations to come. The day a lost child returned home, and the ancient alliance between human and animal proved stronger than the forces of conquest and exploitation. The carved stone memorial stood on the highest point of the canyon rim, its surface etched with symbols that told the story of the bond between Nayeli and Kitanawa in the ancient pictographic language of the Apache people. The monument had been crafted not by human hands alone, but through a collaboration between Apache stoneworkers and the mountain lion himself, who had used his powerful claws to add details that no human artist could have conceived. 5 years had passed since the EEE battle that changed everything, and the canyon country had been transformed into something unprecedented in the history of the American Southwest. A protected territory where Apache people lived in harmony with wildlife allies under an arrangement that confounded territorial officials, but had proven impossible to challenge through conventional legal or military means. Marcus Webb, who had reclaimed his Apache name of Nalnishtahoma, stood beside the memorial as the morning sun painted the desert in shades of gold and amber. His transformation from land developer to protector of Apache rights had created ripples throughout the territorial government, where his intimate knowledge of white legal systems and political networks had proven invaluable in securing formal recognition for Apache land claims. "The federal commissioners still don't understand what they've agreed to," he said to Nayeli, who now wore the responsibilities of her role as bridge speaker with the quiet dignity of someone who had grown into powers that would have overwhelmed a lesser spirit. "They think they've established just another Indian reservation. They have no idea they've created the first official sanctuary for supernatural wildlife alliances." Nayeli, now 12 years old and bearing the wisdom marks of a young medicine woman, smiled as she watched Kitanawa teaching a group of Apache children the basics of animal communication. The great mountain lion had evolved from solitary protector to patient teacher, his presence no longer surprising to anyone in the settlement, but still inspiring awe in visitors from other tribes who came to witness the legendary partnership. Grandmother Itzel says the spirits never reveal their full plan until the proper time, Nayeli replied, her hand resting on the spirit stone that had become as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. Perhaps the commissioner's lack of understanding is itself part of the protection we need. The legal framework that Nalnishtahoma had negotiated was indeed complex beyond the comprehension of most territorial officials. Using his connections with Eastern investors and his detailed knowledge of mineral rights law, he had created a web of agreements that established the Apache territory as a private nature preserve under federal protection, funded by carefully managed mining operations that provided substantial profits while leaving the most sacred areas completely untouched. The arrangement satisfied political pressures for economic development while protecting Apache cultural sites and providing a legal foundation for the supernatural alliances that now served as guardians for a much larger area than the original tribal lands. Other native tribes throughout the region had begun sending delegations to learn how the Apache model might be adapted to their own circumstances. Takala, now a young man who served as one of the primary liaisons between the Apache community and the territorial government, approached the memorial with news from the outside world. 3 more tribes have sent representatives requesting meetings about establishing similar protections, he reported. The Navajo delegation arrived this morning, and they've brought their own bridge speaker, a young woman who claims she can communicate with the sacred horses of their homeland. The spread of supernatural alliances between native people and wildlife was creating a new political reality in the Southwest, one that challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between civilization and wilderness. As word spread of the Apache success in protecting their territory through partnerships with animal spirits, other tribes were discovering or rediscovering their own connections to the natural world. Halona, now recognized as the foremost authority on bridge speaker traditions, had established a teaching lodge where young people from dozens of different tribes came to learn the ceremonies and spiritual practices necessary to forge such alliances. Her students represented a new generation of native leaders who combined traditional wisdom with innovative approaches to protecting their people's future. The old prophecies spoke of a time when the animal spirits would awaken to help human beings remember their proper place in the world, she told Nayeli as they worked together preparing medicinal herbs in the sacred grove. I believe we are living in that time, and that what began with your rescue of Kitanawa is spreading across the entire continent. As evening approached and the first stars appeared in the clear desert sky, the Apache settlement settled into rhythms that would have seemed impossible just 5 years earlier. Children played games that incorporated lessons from their mountain lion teachers. Adults conducted community meetings that included input from representatives of the wildlife allies. Elders told stories that blended ancient traditions with new, chapters being written by each day's experiences. Nayeli and Kitanawa took their places on the familiar rocky outcrop where they had first begun to understand the scope of their partnership. The great mountain lion was now aging, his golden coat showing threads of silver, but his eyes remained as bright and intelligent as ever. Around them, the canyon hosted a thriving ecosystem where human and animal communities existed in conscious cooperation rather than competitive conflict. Do you think it will last? Nayeli asked, her question encompassing not just their individual partnership, but the entire experiment in supernatural diplomacy they had helped create. Kitanawa's response came as a flow of images and emotions that spoke of cycles within cycles, of changes that brought both challenges and opportunities, of the eternal dance between human ambition and natural wisdom. But beneath the complexity of his communication was a simple message of hope, that once awakened, the connections between human and animal consciousness would continue to grow and adapt, finding new forms and expressions as circumstances required. A carved stone memorial stood silhouetted against the star-filled sky, its ancient symbols catching moonlight as they told a story that had become legend throughout the Southwest. The tale of an Apache girl who saved a mountain lion and discovered that the greatest treasures are found not in conquest, but in the Courage to extend compassion to those who need it most. From that small act of childhood kindness had grown a transformation that would reshape the relationship between civilization and wilderness for generations to come, proving that the bonds forged between brave hearts can overcome any obstacle and create possibilities that exist only in the realm of dreams made manifest through love.